Hello, I'm Bob Betts, the Greyhound editor of The Sporting Life. What we're about to show you is something special. It's a tape that we wanted to do for some time. We have brought together some of the greatest greyhounds ever to grace the track. From Mick the Miller to Ballyregan Bob, to Westpark Mustard to Ravage again. And, do you remember this fellow? Yes, it's Scurlogue Champ, one of the greatest names in the sport. He thrilled millions of punters and racegoers with his last to first performances, and he did a lot for greyhound racing. We do hope you enjoy the tape, and our thanks to John Power and our camera team of Dave, Vincent and Clive Lawrence.
Here we are in the depths of the editing suite. It's all in the can. 90 minutes of action featuring some of the all-time great greyhounds. I shall be looking at a couple of them, but joining us will be Neal Foulds, snooker star supreme, and also one of the game's famous owners. Really does love his sport, loves his greyhounds. So why don't you sit back and watch some of the great champion greyhounds. We start off with Mick the Miller, who many people feel was the greatest greyhound of all time. Neal went down to see Sidney Orton's son Claire at his Hersham home just near the Burr Hill kennels where Mick the Miller was trained.
Claire, we're going to ask you to go back to the old days of Mick the Miller and the days in Ireland before he ever reached the track. Apparently he was fortunate to ever get there, wasn't he?
Well, I gather that he was very ill as a puppy. I'm not sure of what the reason was. Probably, I would say, in my opinion, that it was distemper, which was prevalent amongst all greyhounds because there was no real known cure, such as vaccines and that sort of thing, against it. And I would imagine that that was the reason for it. And I gather that, like a lot of litters, they got this disease, and it was just a question of the strongest and the fittest to survive. And having known Mick the Miller and seen him, I'm sure that he was a strong animal, and that's why he survived the illness. It's then, of course, he started racing on the Irish tracks and had a great record over there. 15 out of 20 races or something of that nature. And then, of course, he was brought over to run in the English Derby.
And apparently he was sold, wasn't he, on the terraces at White City, I read.
Yes, he was sold to an Albert Williams, a bookmaker, during the running of the Derby, I believe, but he wasn't transferred until afterwards because he was owned by an Irish priest, Father Brophy, who was instrumental in having him brought over, trained by Mick Horan. And
of course, 800 guineas would have been a lot of money in those days.
Well, it was a lot of money. I suppose it'd be equivalent to what? It would have put him in the £20,000 bracket these days.
I think at least that, yeah.
And he certainly was a great greyhound.
And of course, after the first time he won the English Derby, that's the point at which he was transferred to your father's kennels.
Yes. Well, I think he ran once or twice more, and it was towards the end of the season. He lost his form, and I think he was trained by Stanley Biss at the time, I believe, and there was a general loss of form, and I think the people with the connections saw a chance of cutting, as they thought, cutting their losses. And of course, all the tracks in those days, they had a closed season during the official coursing season. They closed down for about 3 months. So the dog had a long rest off track work, came back fresh and well. But I'm of the opinion that if greyhounds raced longer than they did, they have a curve, if you like, of form. Where they come up, they reach this peak, and they don't seem to be able to get beaten. They always run for a period of time, and then it gradually goes down again till they reach a low, and then the cycle starts again. And I'm sure that if we could run them for 6 or 7 years, you could work out this, and it would ruin a lot of these betting theories, because you could work out that such and such a dog was at his peak of his form, say from a period of through that cycle, and you know that you'd get a good run for your money all the time. And I think this is what, fortunately with Mick the Miller, his peak period was through the summer months, at the best time of the year from the point of view of winning all and getting all these races under his belt. I know when I was working with Leslie Reynolds, just something comes to mind. We were over a cup of coffee one morning at break time, and he said, "You're very lucky if you've got a Derby dog, and you're double lucky if it comes right at Derby time." And I think this is probably one of the reasons where this loss of form with the dog. Then after that rest, he started to peak again when it came to his second Derby, which fortunately there were no traumas of reruns or anything like this.
Yeah, going back to that, when he won his first Derby,
Yes.
as you just mentioned, there was a rerun. What would be the reason for that?
As far as I can understand, that there was a dog was knocked over at the first bend, and this probably caused some interference among the other 3 runners. It was only a 4-dog final. In those, the first Derby finals was 4 dogs. First few Derby finals. The idea was to try and get a clean run race, but in this incident, it didn't work out.
Yes, of course, it's
And,
different nowadays, quite so much.
Yes,
So.
and with Mick being a strong dog, as he obviously was through this, he came back probably freshest of the 4 finalists, and there wasn't a lot of danger. But I'm not sure the winning distances, but he never seemed to win any of his races by very far. He always seemed to know just where the winning line was and put that spurt in.
And then he went on to win the Derby again.
He won it, yes, 1930, I think it was. That was the year my father trained him for his first Derby win. And
Was that a much more straightforward
I think
affair?
it was a straightforward race. I never did hear of any incidents involved in the running of that particular Derby itself, right through from start to finish. I think it was just
He was unbeaten, wasn't he?
unbeaten right through. And the more he got towards the final, I think the greater the crowd rolled into White City.
And he didn't also go to, did he win the Cesarewitch as well?
He won the Greyhound Cesarewitch. I saw him, it was one of the few times I saw him run. I saw him run through the 3 early heats, but unfortunately I had to go back to school for the final. I wasn't able to see the final. But he ran the galloping tracks, I suppose, better than the tight, small tracks.
What kind of tracks would you say that didn't suit him?
Well, Wimbledon didn't suit him at all. Also, my father was saying that he just could not run Wimbledon particularly. I think probably due to the sharp bends and possibly the banking on the track. That may have had some effect. But Wimbledon, I suppose, was the track that he didn't run at his best at. When you come to the big galloping tracks like West Ham, Wembley, White City, Arms Park, Cardiff, where he won the Welsh Grand National, Welsh Derby, these were the tracks that he was at his best.
And didn't he get a nasty injury at Wimbledon as well?
Yes, he injured a shoulder very badly. Fortunately, well, I think this was in the Laurels. But towards the end of the season, and he was rested right throughout the winter months and brought back early in the year with a view to having a tilt at his third derby. But I know wasn't exactly ultrasound he had, but heat treatment and the similar sort of lines to the physiotherapy that's given to them in these days. And it was a long, slow job because there wasn't all the laser treatment. You just had to, the old story, rest and time was the secret of that.
And of course it's unheard of nowadays for a greyhound to go on for a tilt at 3 derbies. He must have been getting old by then, Claire.
Yes, I think he was in his 5th year.
Incredible.
Yes, and 3, 4, yes, he was in his 5th year. And he was running as well then as he was in the earlier derbies. Got through to the final, and unfortunately there's still some, well, I know a father always saying that it should never have been a rerun. There was supposed to have been some fighting on the 3rd bend. And in those days on the derby they had a bend steward on every bend, and the steward at the 3rd bend reported that there was interference and it was declared a no race. Because in these days, of course, it wouldn't have happened in that respect. It would have just been first past the post, which would have been in Mick's favour. And
so it was rerun.
It was rerun, and there was a lot of debate and argument as whether Mick should run again in the final. Being 5 years old, it was thought he was too old to run the second time, but the chief of police in charge of the security at White City said to the connections, that my father included, that he wouldn't be responsible for the crowd's actions if the dog didn't run.
So he still had a lot of followers who maybe
Oh,
put
yes.
a few quid on him.
Yes. There was a fact that, you know, they wanted to see the dog run, and he was such a popular greyhound, and he was Mick, and everybody knew him, and they just wanted to see him and hoped that he could pull off what was proved to be the impossible by winning 3 greyhound derbies.
So the task of a greyhound approaching his 5th birthday, going for it again, proved maybe too much.
Well, I think it did. I mean, it's like asking an older athlete to compete in a second Olympic final, isn't it? So, you know, against a younger man who perhaps isn't quite the class, but has got the greater powers of recovery. And this was the secret, or the trouble behind poor old Mick. He couldn't recover as quickly as the younger greyhounds did. I mean, you imagine they put a greyhound, you can't say to him, take things easily, just qualify. They put everything they've got into their running. And I think that was the reason that he just couldn't recover as quickly as the others had done so.
Here we have the Trainers' Trophy that was won by your father, Claire, during the 2nd derby win.
Yes.
And of course, not only won 5 classics, he went on and held a sequence of 19 wins, which held for over 40 years. Fantastic achievement.
It was a wonderful achievement for the length of time, and of course there wasn't the same amount of racing in those days as there is today, which took a longer period. I think it started in the March of that year, and it only finished in the first round of the Laurels in the August time, when unfortunately the dog finished very seriously lame and was laid off again then until the spring, where he started off again and won his first 4 or 5 races after the injury, which would have made a even better sequence. But he was very, very lame, and it was a long time before they even got the dog fit to gallop, never mind race again.
Of course, that sequence in the middle of it was the derby, which
Yes.
fantastic achievement to
Well,
run a
it-
sequence up to a classic.
Well, it is. And I think it also included the Welsh Derby, which, though not recognised in classic status, was more or less the equivalent of a classic race.
Claire, you've been in greyhound racing for many, many years. Can anything compare to the great Mick the Miller?
I don't think they would. There's been a lot of popular greyhounds, well-known greyhounds, but he had a charisma of his own, if you like, He seemed to know exactly what he was about. Almost though he played to the crowd. And another thing with his popularity was that he belonged to a society beauty, if you like, Mrs. Kempton, and all the popular magazines, London Illustrated, Vogue and all those, used it. And the greyhound, of course, he got publicity of untold quantity and amount that, unfortunately, with the lack of coverage today, that none of these really good greyhounds get. And the sort of thing that when he was on his last legs, when he was dying of old age, there were bulletins in the press every day reporting how he was getting on and that it wouldn't be long. And I think the coverage he got was almost as much as the late king in that particular, George V, got. And he was, in my opinion, on his own as regards to popularity, and there'd been other good greyhounds and probably as good as he was over the time, but you can't compare old champions to the new champions. And wherever you go and you mention greyhound racing and mention Mick the Miller, people have heard of him, but mention any of the other greyhound champions and people don't. They look at you gone out half the time.
Next we feature Westpark Mustard, the only bitch on the tape. Neal caught up with Wembley trainer Tom Johnston and asked him how much the bitch cost in the first place.
She was leased, as a matter of fact, for £2,500, which would have been quite a good price in those days. Cyril Young, later known as Cyril Scotland, leased her from Dave Murphy from Cork, after she did a good run round Cork, 29:30 odd, and came over for the Derby in 1974. Unfortunately, she qualified and dislocated a toe, went back to Ireland, and then she came back and went to Perry Bar. Frank Baldwin trained her for a while, got in the final of the Wood Lane Stakes at White City, and I picked her up after she ran in the final, which she got beaten in.
Yes, I was going to say, you've got Cyril Scotland, the owner there. What's the story about him? Apparently you called him by a different name earlier on there.
Well, apparently in Scotland in those days, he was in the banking profession, and it was a little bit, they were very conservative up there, and it was frowned upon that he was in a gambling sport, even though he'd been with greyhounds virtually all his life.
Had he ever had dogs with you before?
Oh yes, he had dogs with me for quite a long time, from probably the middle 60s, somewhere around there. Yeah. Very good dogs.
Yeah. Well, her run of victories began with an exciting short-head victory over Mertown. Did she achieve much before that?
No, not in this country. The best runs had been done in Ireland beforehand. I don't think she'd won many races before that.
No. And of course, following that, then she ran over further distances, 700 yards plus, up to distances of 800 yards. Was that an obvious decision?
Yes, it was, because even though she beat Mertown, who was the Derby favourite that year, would have been the Derby favourite that year, she only caught him a short head on the line at Wembley, and it was obvious she wanted a further distance of 700 yards, probably plus, at that time.
And of course, then she went on to break a track record over at Brough Park there, over 725 yards. That must have been an exciting evening.
It was. Probably the biggest crowd in greyhound racing in that area for a long, long time. She generated a lot of interest wherever she went. Of course,
yes. And then of course she ran up a sequence which got to 15. That was after she won a Grand Prix trial stake there at Walthamstow. And then she came in season, and that threw maybe tossed away chances for you to take on some of the major classics with her, the stay-in classics. Was you disappointed about that?
Probably yes and no. We could have run her in the St Ledger, but she wouldn't have been fully fit. But at that time, we realised we had a chance of going for Mick the Miller's record. So after that, we decided we would go for the record. It was a little bit clinical the way we did it in those days.
I was wondering about that actually, about the record. At what point exactly would you have said where, well, hey, we've got a chance here?
Round about that time, probably around about the 13th race, somewhere around there. Because the dog's about over the 700 yards or in that area. Probably could have been better in those days.
Yes. And of course, following her seasonal rest, you had the task of getting her race fit quickly. Of course, you didn't have the opportunity of a pipe opener race for her. With the record on after 15 wins, presumably she had to be right.
No, she did, yes. We kept her very well while she was in season. And I can't remember now how many trials she had, but she was race fit when she had her first race. I think she did a very good time when she won it. I think it was at White City or something like that.
She obviously, that would have given you a problem, presumably wondering maybe, did you have any sleepless nights wondering if you had got her right or whatever? Because following a seasonal rest, obviously, it would have been a good training feat for her to be spot on.
Oh, you always do. You always wonder if you've got it right. You never know until the day, till they've run.
And of course, with the record of possibility, there must have been a lot of pressure on yourself and your staff at that point.
Oh, yeah, there's a hell of a lot of pressure. Every race, it was virtually like a derby final.
Yeah, I read in one of the cuttings actually about her that you had a 24-hour watch on the kennels, keeping an eye on her, obviously monitor every move, because it must have been, as I say, very exciting for you.
Well, every trainer's got a 24-hour watch in the kennels all the time, but when you get a greyhound that's going into a race, odds on every time, you've got to safeguard the betting public as well. So you're probably more vigilant.
Tom, can you tell us how that race went on that record-breaking night at Wembley?
Yeah, it was quite a day, that. A lot of pressure on everybody. The race itself wasn't a particularly good race for Westpark Mustard, or Lassie, how we used to call her in the kennels. As far as I can recall, it was only a 4-dog race. She broke slow, got into all kinds of trouble, even though there was only 3 other runners, and eventually got herself out of it, and I think she took lead off the last bend and won quite comfortably in the end. But it was a little bit of a worry. Halfway around the track, she probably wasn't one of her best races.
But a mark of her true ability, obviously, to be not quite up to her very best, but still win comfortably in the end.
Yes, I would have said she ran under par, but she ran quite well in the end. Yeah, she made it anyhow, and everybody's delighted. And I think she was about 14 to 1 on that night, something like that.
Yeah, very prohibitive odds, eh?
I don't think many people would have backed her.
But again, a mark of just what people thought about the race, obviously. It was hard to see any kind of defeat, wasn't it?
At that particular time, over those kind of distances it was, yes, she was out on her own. Yeah, no, she was a hell of a good bitch.
So with Mick the Miller's record broken, 44-year-old record that is, what followed?
Went to Ireland for an invitation race at Shelbourne Park, over 600 yards, and she had a solo trial, went reasonably well, but in the racing we're talking about, Tommy Astaire won the race. She got a bump in the first bend and unfortunately came off lame, finished 3rd, and that was more or less the end of well, it was the end of the record-breaking sequence. And then unfortunately she came back and she went very sick and was off probably 3 months or more, something like that, and had 1 or 2 races afterwards, but definitely was not the Westpark Mustard that we knew.
Very disappointing end, obviously, for yourself.
Very disappointing end, and obviously she retired then and went back to the breeder, who she was leased from in the first place. That was the agreement.
To her racing career, during the sequence, mostly, she must have had 1 or 2 moments where maybe things didn't go so well. Maybe you had 1 or 2 worries about 1 or 2 of the races.
Yes, there was. There was one race in question, the 550 yards at Perry Bar. We didn't really want to run her there, but over that short distance, but at that particular time there was no races about. And we had to run her over the 550 yards. And of course, in those days, it wasn't easy to get races for Westpark Mustard, because you'd ring up racing offices and you'd mention Westpark Mustard for a race, and the races wouldn't fill. So we were limited Not like it is nowadays, where they actually put on races, invitation races and something like that, just to get the dogs running round the tracks and drawing the crowds.
No one was keen to come along for place money, is that what you're saying?
That's right, yes. We had great difficulty sometimes.
I'm sure.
I could mention one or two instances, but I won't. I think discretion's the better part of valor.
We'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very unfair question, but how do you think she would have coped with the likes of Mick the Miller and Ballyregan Bob?
Oh, she hadn't asked me that. I don't really know. Different eras, very hard to say. Mick the Miller, obviously a good dog. I didn't see him run. Ballyregan Bob, yes, he was the tops at his time. And then, of course, you had another one in that era as well, Scurlogue Champ, who was a crowd pleaser. And I'll discuss Ballyregan Bob and Westpark Mustard. I would say Ballyregan Bob was the best dog about at that time, and I'd say Westpark Mustard is the best bitch that there's been. And I think that's the only way I can sum that up.
An all-time favourite of everybody was Scurlogue Champ, an incomparable record and amazing style of running. We lead off by seeing him in front of a big crowd at Wimbledon Stadium. It's Derby night 1985. Okay, we're with Alan Lennox now, a greyhound writer for The Sporting Life. Every Friday you'll see his personality profile. Also a greyhound owner. There's Vic Snowdrop and a few trophies she's won. Alan has been going greyhound racing for a lot longer than he probably cares to remember. 1954, I think he saw his first Derby final. And we're here today to talk about a greyhound that Alan's chronicled the career of very closely, the incomparable Scurlogue Champ. Alan, you saw a lot of his races over here and you're a real expert on the dog. Could you just, before we start looking at a few of his highlights, tell us what happened to the dog before he came and made his debut in England?
Well, Scurlogue Champ was born in County Wexford in Ireland. He had two races there, Wexford and Enniscorthy, which he both won. He was then, as is often the case with Irish dogs, he was put in Shelbourne Cells at Dublin. And that's where Ken Peckham from Norfolk first got his eyes on the dog. And he was bought at the sale. The figure has never really been revealed, but it's understood to be about £1,700. Now, Ken Peckham, who was a haulage contractor in Norfolk, he brought the greyhound over in May 1984, and he had his first race in front of the British public in July 1984 at White City. Now, this was a 730-metre race, and it's quite obvious that people had heard about this dog in advance, because he was back down to 7-4 on favourite. Well, suffice to say, he won the race at White City very comfortably indeed. But sadly, July 1984, that was Scurlogue Champ's only opportunity to run round White City, because the track closed in September. But of course, as you know, he travelled the length and breadth of the country afterwards.
That's right, it really was a remarkable career. I believe in 64 races he was favourite in all but 3 of them, wasn't he? In the early part of his career, Alan, when did you first realise that this was a phenomenal greyhound?
Well, he ran in Catford over the 718 metres, and he won so comfortably that it was almost embarrassing. But this was when people suddenly realised that this was a greyhound rather unusual in style. For a start, he never appeared to race at all during the first lap. Many people sort of thought he's not interested in racing and had almost given up any prospects of winning. Suddenly, when the second lap came round, because he never ran below 655 metres during his career in Britain, but when the second lap came around, Scurlogue Champ came around too, and people knew he was at the races then.
What about the early highlights? I mean, which races can you remember in particular, apart from that Catford event?
Well, in May 1985, he ran round Wembley, and it was the most extraordinary race of 710 metres. And this was one of his real dropping out exercises. I think there is photographic evidence of him actually being about 2 bends behind Glenfort Champ. Well, he came round and he won the race in due course, and behind him on that day was Jet Circle, who went on to win the St. Leger that year. So this was the class of the dog. He just didn't run for one lap, but ran like blazes for the second lap.
That's the thing I think that's worth mentioning, that there was a decent class of marathon performer at that time. There were dogs like Keen Rocket, Glen Owen Queen. I mean, they would have been top class these days, wouldn't they?
Well, the first greyhound that Scurlogue Champ beat in that 730 metre race at White City was Gala Louise, Gaskin's great greyhound. She was a wonderful bitch, and he beat her, giving her half a lap start. Well, giving her 20 length start anyway.
He quickly became a people's champion in the same sort of way that Alex Higgins in snooker.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, they loved him. Ballyregan Bob, who we'll talk about later, was the kind of Rolls Royce, wasn't he? But he was a real...
That's right. First Scurlogue Champ was Alex Higgins. I think Ballyregan Bob was Steve Davis.
Yeah.
So Higgins had the people with him, so did Ballyregan. So did Scurlogue Champ, rather. He had the people with him all the time. And went on, of course, to start getting some classic honours. He won the 1985 Cesarewitch. There was a small technicality there. The dog required, I think, some treatment from another trainer in the region where Ken Peckham had his kennels, George Drake. And I think on a technicality that the Walmsley brother Cesarewitch that was the first classic that Scurlogue Champ won. I think that was trained by George Drake rather than Ken Peckham.
That's right, the history books will show
that's
that.
That's correct.
You may sort of look through and think, well, that's got to be a misprint, but yeah.
Technical misprint.
And then, of course, the success story continued, and he started running up some sequence, didn't he, Alan?
He did.
Tell us about that sequence and then how it came to a rather unseemly end.
Well, as we know, that the record sequence initially in greyhound racing were the 19 races that Mick The Miller set in the 1930s. Then in 1974, Westpark Mustard came along to beat that record. And we were all wondering, when was this going to go? One or two people have had a go at it since, Lucky High there in the 60s. But suddenly we had Scurlogue Champ really doing the business. But it wasn't so much as the winning, it was the manner of the winning. And any time he was running, you knew you were in for a bit of a thrill, and that's what put the people through the gates. You know, more and more people were turning up just to see, sometimes to see him getting beat, but often to see him if he really could give 20 lengths and 30 lengths start to greyhounds of the class he was always competing against. Well, he was on a nice roll of 16 in July 85, when unfortunately all came unstuck. He went to Peterborough, I was there, and in this Open he stopped racing, it must be said, after about 150 metres. He didn't go clear from the second bend. there's been a lot of discussion about that race since, but suffice to say that Scurlogue Champ was reported lame soon afterwards and had a small spell off the track, and the race went to Sneaky Liberty. Again, winner, but you know, the villain or the villainess of the piece, because she had broken and interrupted a great possible record that Scurlogue Champ was going for.
Absolutely, but of course, Scurlogue was always expertly and diligently handled by Ken and Pat Peckham, wasn't he? And they brought him back just as good as ever, really, didn't they?
Yes. I mean, we saw him win on Derby Night 85 in his typical fashion, one of the supporting races, I think 8 metres. And Pat Peckham, of course, she was the parader for the dog. I don't think she'd let him out of her sight, really. And what we then found was we were all looking for a repeat performance in the Durand Marathon in 1986. That was a great year. Tico won the Derby that year. Wimbledon, of course, second year of Wimbledon Greyhound Derbies. And Scurlogue did his usual business. I mean, third bend, I think my race card on the night reads, dropped out third, no chance in inverted commas. That's the sort of comment that's on quite a few of my race cards for Scurlogue Champ. Well, off we went. Suddenly there's at least 15 lengths between him and Covenham last round, the last two bends. But this was one that Scurlogue Champ didn't win.
Now, I remember just coming up to the showdown, which we were about to talk about with Ballyregan Bob. I believe he was in some sort of decent form before that, wasn't he?
That's right. I think he won, was it 5 races with a sort of distances of 75 lengths gross between them or something? He certainly wasn't winning by short heads, that's for sure.
No, that's right.
I think his largest winning distance was either 18 or 21 lengths, but my memory sometimes slips, you know. But there we are. He certainly won, winning by half the track, having given them half the track start, always as usual, you know.
So then we've got the showdown.
Yes, that was the first time I had to queue to get into a greyhound track in 30 years, I can tell you.
Yeah.
I literally queued down the steps of Wembley that day in December 1985 for the showdown.
But the build-up to the race, did you think the trip gave Scurlogue Champ a chance, or did you think that it was short enough to favour Ballyregan Bob, who it was generally regarded had the better all-round speed?
Well, it was amazing how these two greyhounds had to come together at this time. It's like we had Steve Ovett and racing against Sebastian Coe. We always seem to have two champions at the same time, and they do or they don't meet. Well, this had to be made. This was a match that had to be made, and I must say that I think that Scurlogue Champ's Connections made the greatest concessions on the day by settling for a 710-metre distance. But by the same token, I don't think anyone had ever suggested that Ballyregan Bob was capable of getting 800 metres and beyond. So it was a match that had to be made, and of course it turned into something of an anticlimax. As you know, Ballyregan Bob made a reasonable break, which was part and parcel of his style. Scurlogue Champ dropped himself out again, but didn't get to the third bend on that occasion. Again, he was reported lame, but this was another race that Scurlogue Champ didn't complete.
So Alan, that showdown was a bit of an anticlimax, but that wasn't the end for Scurlogue, was it?
Oh no, I mean we're used to anticlimaxes in sport, but after that he had another 13 races and quietly got on with winning 11 of them. Sadly, in August 1986 he went lame at Nottingham, and that was the end of his career.
We were all looking forward then, of course, to some sort of stud career from Scurlogue Champ, but that wasn't to be, was it?
No, that's right. We'll never see his like again, A, because there can never be another Scurlogue Champ, but sadly, he's proved to be infertile at stud, and even now, 6-7 years later, he's yet to throw a pup.
So his business now these days is just basically public appearances and that kind of thing?
That's right. I think his greyhound racing's answered to Red Rum. He goes round and opens fetes and shows, and the old ladies pat him on the head and things like that. So I think he's got a nice quiet retirement in front of him. What Scurlogue Champ and what Ken and Pat Peckham can look back to is a career that saw him break 20 track records, win 51 races from 63 starts, but they couldn't have made a lot of money as regards betting because he only started odds against on 5 occasions out of 63.
What sort of debt does greyhound racing owe Scurlogue Champ, do you think?
Immeasurable. In the 1980s, greyhound racing wasn't exactly at the peak of its 60-year career, really, 60-year history. We needed a shot in the arm. We needed people through the turnstiles, and Scurlogue Champ did almost as much as any single greyhound could do to have given that shot in the arm to an industry that should be forever grateful.
And I don't think the showdown episode should be allowed to overshadow that at all.
Not at all, not at all. How often are these things how often do these things turn into anticlimaxes? This was one of them, but just look at 51 wins from 63 starts. Just look at the extra thousands on the gate, and just look at the reams of paper that's been written about the greyhound, and all the interest nationwide that there has been.
Incredibly, just a year after Scurlogue Champ was born, along came Ballyregan Bob, a dog with a phenomenal, outstanding record. They say he had blue blood coursing through his veins, but when he needed to, he could fight from the back as well. And here we see him in the Essex Vars at Romford doing just that. That was a terrific run and one that kept his winning sequence going. I caught up with his trainer George Curtis recently and asked him if he feared Scurlogue Champ when they met in that famous showdown.
Well, Scurlogue was an 8-8 marathon dog, in my opinion, the greatest probably marathon dog we've ever seen, the most exciting dog I've ever seen. But I thought over the 700, I thought we had the beating of him. I really thought we had a very good chance of beating him anyway, because if he give us 20 or 30 yards start, I couldn't see him pulling us back, truthfully. And every time I see him run, he just used to drop himself out, Scurlogue, like that was his style of running. And that's what excited people so much. I mean, he could be 20, 30, even 40 yards, but you thought he'd gone lame. And all of a sudden he changed gear and he went through the field, and this is what made him so popular. And he was the people's champion, no doubt about it. But Bob, to me, like, he could do fantastic times over the short trip. I mean, 29.63 at Brighton and 67 in the same week. He was such a fast dog, I thought he'd be a mile in front. And I thought, you know, we had a very, very good chance. All you had to do was get out, keep clear. If he got in trouble, it's a different story. But if we could get in front, I didn't think Scurlogue could beat him.
At what sort of trip do you think possibly it would have started levelling itself off?
After 800. After 800, I think Bob would have been coming back and he would have been going twice as fast.
As it happens, of course, obviously Scurlogue did go lame. It must have been a great disappointment for you that the full result or the proper result wasn't seen to be done.
It was, you know, I was there and I was shocked. I mean, the first thing that went through my mind, they're going to stop the air. But I think it's Miss Dixon, Ted Dixon's daughter, jumped on the track. And really, I mean, I've got her to thank for us doing what he done, because it'd have been a no race if she hadn't picked him up. And, you know, I often in my mind, when I see her, I always think to myself, thanks for that anyway, because she definitely saved the day that day. But I always thought Scurlogue was so far behind, couldn't hear the air, he couldn't see the air. That's my honest opinion. You see, the crowd was about 8,000, 10,000, something like that. They were screaming. They loved the dog. But he was 30 yards behind. He couldn't see the air. He couldn't hear it. And I think he wondered what it was all about. And that's the truth. And he just got to that point, and he just stopped, and he was turning back. And lucky enough, Miss Dixon picked him up.
Were you glad that Scurlogue was on the scene the same time as Ballyregan Bob?
Oh yeah, I think it done racing a tremendous lot of good, like, you know. I mean, everybody in the game, they were all waiting for him to meet. Because I was sitting in Catford one night outside, and I could hear people as they're walking by, you know, saying, do you reckon Scurlogue will ever meet Ballyregan? I mean, it's like Ben and Eubank, isn't it? You know, everybody's waiting for them. It's the same thing. You know, everybody wanted it to happen, but unfortunately somebody's got to be disappointed, like. And I think if Scurlogue had put a finish in and got within, say, a length or a couple of lengths of Ballyregan, and then gone by him after the line, everybody would have been happy. But unfortunately, they never got a run for their money, like, and because there are a lot of disappointed people.
No, that's right. But of course, you mentioned earlier Ballyregan Bob's phenomenal four-bend pace. I remember witnessing his lead trilogy of really, really fast runs culminating in a 31.07, which I still regard as possibly the best track record of all time. But the race against Ballintubber 1 in the Trainers' Championship in the spring of 1985, that one stood out in the memory as well.
I think that was his greatest race. I think because the distance. I mean, Ballintubber 1 went back to Ireland, was a dog of the year. He won 2 classics over there. He wasn't no slouch. And if you remember the race, they come out about level, and they went to the bend. Won a lot in it going to the bend. But Ballintubber 1 was a better tracker. And we ran off a bit on the second, and he must have taken 2.5, 3 length lead on us. And everybody thought that was it. Then all of a sudden you see Regan sort of hold him, and all of a sudden he started gaining. And then as he came in the third and fourth, he started to move, and the people there went potty. That was the most exciting race, and I think probably his hardest race.
And a 28.62 bears testimony to his all-round pace.
That was good, yeah. And then if you look back in his record and have a look at the trial sprint he did at Walthamstow, I think he did a 24.90 something, and I think the track record stood at 25 something for years. And that's over a sprint. So he could run, don't worry about that.
Of course, after that you were faced with a tough decision about whether or not to put him in the Derby. Was it a tough decision whether or not to run in that year's Derby?
Not for me, it wasn't. It was for a lot of people. And the owner probably, they all dream about having a Derby winner, like. But I was more worried about him getting hurt. That's what worried me. I mean, I took him to Arringay. He lucky to come off of Arringay. He got turned around on the bend, and the sand marks were there all through the meeting. And I said to Cliff Kevin then, I said, we're going back with a sound dog. Let's think we're lucky, because he could have broke his hock. Took him to Wembley for the Blue Ribbon or something like that, and he got done again on the corner. In his early days, I took him for the Puppy Derby at Wimbledon. He got cut up twice there. But it's only because his pace was going, but he wasn't a Derby dog. I don't think he was a Derby class dog to the corner. And he was getting trouble. And I said, if we can only get him round the 6 bends, he won't meet that class of dog. And then when he starts to get, I said to Cliff, I said, yes, you do times they've never seen before. Once he gets going, I said. And I you know, he thought at the time, he was so downhearted, and he thought, yeah, you know, it's got to come. But it did come. And I knew in my mind, I knew what the dog could do if I could only get him round the extra bend. Because every time I see him run with class dogs, he was in the middle of them. And you can't keep on getting drawn trap 6 every night, can you? See, so what I did, and I'd do it again if I had the same chance. Cause if it had been White City, I'd have gone. Which City, yeah, take them on, have a go. Could have got nice long straights, you've got a chance to show your pace. Wimbledon's a bit tight, you know, and I'll never regret it, no, never.
Well, history's proved you to be correct, of course, and presumably you had the St Ledger of that year on your mind quite early on anyway, didn't you?
Right, I did.
Tell us about the campaign there, because he won his first 2 rounds very, very easily, and he was on a roll. He was a big-name dog by now. And the semi-final against when he beat Evening Light. Tell us about that race, because that was a bit special, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you say he got a good run. The dog got a good run, and everything went right for him. I think he went around about 39.47. I don't know, something near enough. Was that the time?
That was the quarter-final, 39.46. He did the clock then.
Yeah.
And then in the semi?
Oh, in the semi is when he got hurt. Yeah, that's right, yeah. He went over the back of a dog inside of him, and he went over the back. He had to jump the dog, and when he came off the track, he had his old wrist was all swollen up, and there was no way we could ever run him. Poor Cliff, we were living in hope to win the Ledger, and everything was going lovely until that happened. And as I say, when I had to tell him, I said, "There's no way you can run." I think I knocked the bottom out of him, but unfortunately, there was nothing I could do about it. But that was one of the biggest blows I've probably had.
Presumably a lesser dog wouldn't have even got in the first 3 in that race.
No, to do what he did, I mean, if you'd have seen him when he came off the track, how he ever got up there to win, I don't know. I just don't know. When you kind of weigh it up, I mean, he's had some close calls, at Romford, he just got up on the line to start it off with, and then you say to go lame and give those dogs that start. If you see the video, I expect you'll see it, and he gave them quite a long start, and then he picked them up. But if you watch that, in all these races, he used to fly away after the line. But that race, he couldn't go, because, I mean, it must have been playing him,
Well, after 3 months, he came back, and I think he won his next 7 races, doing track records in 5 of them. So it was obvious he was back, wasn't it? And in actual fact, the race that equalled the British record, broke the British record, was the one after the showdown at Brighton, just to the back end of 1985. And he absolutely stuffed a brilliant dog in Trackman. Now, Trackman still holds the Catford 555 record.
That's right.
And that must really have given you a great deal of satisfaction.
Yeah, it did. In front of our own crowd, it was wonderful. All your friends and that, and the people when he used to start, they always keep on saying Bobby, Bobby. You could hear him on the video. But he had his admirers, and same as Scurlogue. They were 2 great dogs. But for me, Ballyregan's the best 700 yard I've ever seen in my life.
And that race where he broke the British record, did you have a sleepless night beforehand, or were you confident he'd do the business?
Well, the only thing that worries you, truthfully, is can he keep out of trouble? That is the truth. The only way I could see him get beat, I said, there's not a dog that beat him. It'd be bad luck. And that's not being whoever had him, whoever handled the dog. He was that good. It was not just me. It was the dog.
After that, you picked your races sparingly over the next 12 months to build him up to that great record of Joe Dumps. And the night when it was all going to happen was back at Hove again in front of your home crowd on the 9th of December 1986. The news cameras were there, it was broadcast nationally. What were your feelings when you first saw the makeup of the race? When you first saw the quality of opponents, did you bother to study it carefully, or did you worry that maybe there'd be a rising young stayer in there? Or?
Well, not really. I mean, I thought, as we came closer to it, I think we didn't have the opposition, truthfully. We never had the opposition at the last 4 races. I don't think we had the opposition we had early on. But, I mean, that was nothing to do with us. I mean, we just went for the races, and we had to take whatever came, and I think I had a bitch in the final one. Our own bitch finished second to him. I think about 9 lengths behind him.
That was Swift Breeze.
Swift Breeze, you see. Jane Nix's breed again. And I think she had another one in there too. Finished third or something. But anyway, old Jane, she breeds a few good ones, and as I say, he won on merit, no doubt about it. But the opposition won as good as well it could have been. But unfortunately, the dogs weren't a beat. There was a bitch coming up, I think it was Westmead Move. That was the one we were worried about, but she wasn't available at the time. I would have been a bit worried if she'd have been there.
Because she'd won the Grand Prix and the gold collar of that year.
Yeah.
Where did you watch the race from?
I watched it from up in the restaurant, because, you know, we were having a party there. Like, I was with Cliff, actually. And once he struck the front, like, you know, we didn't have much worry about then. But up until then, like everything else, it's always been clever afterwards. But you always got that little feeling in case something happens. Misses break, dog hits him, bang. You know, but once he got clear, I mean, I'd never had no fears.
And what was the feeling like when he was out on that last lap on his own?
Oh, fantastic. We were going potty out there. Well, you see on the old videos, me and Cliff were jumping up in the air, shouting. It was just like going through the crowd, you know, with minders, you know, getting you to the track, like, you know, it was terrific. And everybody, you know, wishing you luck and all. It's great, you know. It was a great thing for racing.
Stuff. Of course, I mean, that record hasn't been beaten yet, but one came close, Ravage again, didn't he? What did you think of him?
Well, he's a fantastic sprinter. I thought, truthfully, if you said to me which is the hardest, I would have said the hardest is doing it, sprinting, doing it. Eddie ever did 31, I don't know, 32 or whatever it is, 30 or 31, one or something like that. How he ever did it, I don't know, because it must be harder. You can't blink your eye in a sprint. I mean, you know, you've only got to miss your break and you're in trouble. How he ever did it, I don't know. And when they told me he was going to break it, I thought it's impossible. But he got near enough to it, I tell you.
You saw him, I presume, when he ran at Hove in the wing spares?
Yeah, brilliant dog. Tremendous pace.
And what about, you were telling me one earlier about a dog in the 30s, was it Ballyregan Moon?
Ballyregan Moon was probably one of the greatest greyhounds ever to race on the track. I mean, Sidney Alton trained him, and it was during the war years, and you only race once a week. And Ballyregan Moon got beat by Laughing Lackey at White City by a neck to stop him winning 23 on the trot. He'd have won 23 races on the trot if he got beat, you know, and he went on to win another 7 afterwards. He'd have had 23 on the trot, and he ran mostly over sprints, you know, up to 500s. He probably 550 was too far for him, 525 was enough. But I think he won the greatest greyhounds ever to race, Ballyregan Moon.
And what about the record now? Do you think it's safe, or do you worry about it going?
Well, I think it's pretty safe. I mean, Joe don't. They tell me, I don't know if it's true, but like, they don't have the open races. It's more or less it's Grady races in America, and that's the difference. They could, you know, put a dog on in the same more or less grades every night, I suppose, if they wanted to. But with us, we took on all comers. That's the difference in England. I mean, you know, you don't pick your races, you enter and hope you get a good race. But we could have got beat, but as it turned out, he had that extra bit of pace to just get him there in time. I think John Coleman, if you was talking to him, he said when he ran it in the Essex Fast, I think in his first ring, when he got up to win on the line, he just managed to beat a dog from up the north somewhere. And in racing, he was heard to say, "No more weight win, I don't think you're qualified." And that's how far he looked. It didn't look like it was possible for him to do it. But he had that extra gear.
A bit of a Rolls Royce, wasn't he, George?
Yeah, the greatest grain for me, like I'd never get another grain. I mean, Yankee Express for me was the greatest competition dog I ever trained. I mean, what he did is unbelievable. You know, he won 3 classics, the Pall Mall, the William Muir Lead, and he was the greatest grain probably, you know, for competition. I'll never get another dog like him. But Ballyregan had extra gear. That was what made him, and whoever had trained him would have done well with him because he was that much faster than any other dog running.
They said Ballyregan Bob's world record would stay forever. But along came a sprinter from Scotland called Ravage again, who came so close to breaking it. One of his 29 straight wins came here at Sunderland. That blistering early pace, we can see, bring him another track record. Scottish-based father and son Willie and Graham Frew handled the dog for most of his career, but Ravage again did have a spell down south where he took on some of the best dogs around. He was handled by Terry Dartnell, and Neal caught up with Terry at Wembley and asked him when he first heard about the dog.
Well, all I knew is that the dog was some sort of sprint type of greyhound. My very good friend Willie Frew trained the dog in Scotland, and he'd run up a smashing sequence, and I was always eager to see the results in the paper to see how was Willie doing with this Ravage again dog. I knew he'd built up a sequence of 10, 11, and so it went on and went on. Now all of a sudden he's reached 22 straight wins. And just before the 22nd straight win, Willie Frew had rung me up and said, well look, this dog's got to be proving himself down south, so there's a race coming out called the Etherington Sprint. Would you be prepared to take the dog on? Would you take the dog on and train the dog for the Etherington Sprint? And Billy's been a pal of mine for over 20 years. I said, well, Willie, it's not a problem. Just whenever you want to bring the dog down, bring him down and we'll just work away. So he gave me, I think it was about 6 weeks grace. He brought the dog down and we let the dog settle and we did this and we did that and everything was fine. And the owners were quite happy for the dog to be with me. And we took him to Hoe for a sprint trial, his first trial with me. And he got the first corner and he checked badly whether it was actually where the grass goes to sand, but my young son was with me. And we kennelled the dog up, and there's a play park just to the right of the first bend, the first sprint bend. And my son happened to get on the swings, and he was swinging on the swings. And the swings were squeaking badly, very badly. I mean, my son's actually deaf in one ear, and he could hear him squeaking so badly, so now I know they must be squeaking badly. Well, as the dog got the first corner, he checked badly. So on the way home, I said to my son, I said, well, it could have been the grass to sand. He said, it could have been the squeaky swings, Dad. And he was right, it could have been the squeaky. Anyway, we went back there the following week. As luck would have it, it was his second trial round there. And now they'd oiled the swings. Whether that they oiled the swings or that he just went from turf to sand just perfectly this time, he went round okay. And then he got in the first round, which he won and did the track record, and then he got in the semi-final and he did the track record and he did the same in the final, which was nice. But there was no problem as far as taking the dog on for money for him.
Of course, Terry, in running up a sequence of 22 wins, up north, a lot of people had said that he hadn't beaten much, and of course he was in line for a possible go at Ballyregan Bob's record, and they said that he hadn't taken on quality opposition. How do you feel about that, Terry?
Well, the fact of the matter is that he won 22 sprint races on the trot before I got the dog. Now, this must be some sort of greyhound. He's beaten whether they're good dogs, bad dogs, or what sort of dogs. He's run on different surfaces, behind different hares, on different tracks. I mean, he'd even gone over to Clonmel and won 2 races at the festival meeting, which in itself is some sort of thing to do, to take a dog from England, or Scotland as it was, and to win races in Ireland and then come back over. That was some sort of feat for the dog. The dog was a phenomenon. There's no shadow of a doubt, in my mind anyway. In my mind, I don't think the 29 straight wins will ever be beaten. Sprinting this is.
And of course, when he went and won the Etherington Sprint, he beat the likes of Drew's John O and the cream of the sprinters, really. Did you feel that he'd answer some of his critics then?
Well, surely. I mean, when he did the track record, I mean, there was another good little sprint dog in that race called Pop Swing. That was a very dog that came down from Sheffield, I believe, and that was a very good type of sprint dog. I think it won round Wembley in 1612, I believe, somewhere around about there. And that was a very, very, very good sprint dog, and he'd beaten that. Through his John Joe, I mean, he was the only other dog I think in the final that was unbeaten. And it was a bit of a match in the final, but it never turned out that way in the end. Once this dog's feet touched the floor, the dog was away and gone, and surely he answered his critics by just doing that.
And of course, did you find him a good dog to train, Terry? Because
the dog was a magnificent dog to train, as I found most of the real special dogs that I've had to train. Most good dogs, they just do it always. He was very good at the temperament that he had. He was very good with exercise. He was good to eat his grub. He was good with when he was being handled. You could do whatever you wanted to the dog. He was a very, very nice dog to handle. I mean, in actual fact, the dog, people don't know that haven't been very close to the dog, but in actual fact, this dog had a broken tail, just about 3 or 4 inches from the base of his tail was broken, and he had a dislocated toe on the back. Now, he's done that. I mean, they're just old injuries. Whether he contracted them when he was a pup, probably. I mean, he always had them when Willie Frew had them, and he always had them when I had them. So, I mean, he's run and done that winning with these injuries that were visible. So he's some sort of ground, and I mean, it's just, I'd love to see him come along again. I don't think he ever will, but I'd love to see a dog of his calibre come along again, just for the racing game more than anything.
well, you're a Wembley trainer, Terry, and another Wembley trainer, Tom Johnson, at the time had Strange Dilly, another top-class sprinter. Now that was the only dog that Ravage again never beat, for the simple reason they never actually met. How come they never met, although they were both like at the same track at the same time?
I think the situation was that when Ravage again was doing his best running, I think Strange Dilly was sidearmed with some sort of lameness, and vice versa. When Strange Dilly started to do his running, Ravage again was sidearmed with lameness. I mean, he had a shoulder injury which he contracted after the Edmonton Sprint final. He trialled him at Wembley and he damaged the shoulder. Now the original idea was for the dog to go back now to Scotland. How can I send back a dog that the dog's come down to me sound and won his races now? I can't send a dog that's lame back there. So I said, now leave the dog with me and we'll get the dog spot on and then he can go back. It's not a problem then. And I kept him off, I think, for about 8 or 9 weeks. Now something after that 9 weeks he did, which people don't really realise what the dog did, but I tried him at Wimbledon. He had a 252 at Wimbledon. Now the Wimbledon clock for 252, I believe, is a 10-year-old clock, and Dies of Moth has got this 10-year-old clock. 1508, I believe. It might be 1506, 1508. I think it's 1506, maybe. Ravage again went to the boxes before racing in a trial after being off 8 weeks with a shoulder and recorded 1502. I mean, he smashed the 252 clock after being off for 2 months. And then now he's okay. The shoulder must be, I mean, the shoulder was perfect after that trial. So we gave him another couple of runs. He won at Swindon, I think, and he won at Hall Green. And then it was only fair for the dog to go back where he came from, because that was always in the original deal, that Willie would send the dog to me, for me to run him through the Edmonton Sprint, and then he goes straight back to Scotland.
How did you feel about the dog going up north? Did you feel that, you know, you'd have liked to have took the dog past Ballyregan Bob's record yourself, or did you feel it was the right thing?
No. I think that Willie Frew had won 22 on the bounce. I think it was just right that he should have the dog back to do the thing. I mean, the dog was Scottish owned, and he'd done most of his runs in Scotland. It was only right that the dog should try and attempt the record up in Scotland. I thought that was just right that the dog should go back.
And of course, the dog went to 29 wins and finally was beaten. You must have been particularly disappointed, even though he didn't actually train the dog then, to see the dog losing under those circumstances, that close to the record. Well,
I was for Willie's sake, because he's a great ambassador for the game, and Willie was great with the dog. He was great for the dog, great for the game, but I think there might have been some politics involved whereby the dog maybe should have gone to Shawfield rather than Powderall. But I don't know. It's, you know, I think maybe the distance was a bit short for him. I think he probably wanted the long straights at Shawfield. But I don't know. I mean, the point of it is the dog still won 29 straight sprint wins, which I think will never ever be better. Not in this country. Not in my lifetime. I wouldn't have thought anyway.
And of course, following his defeat, he was retired. Do you think that was the right decision, Terry?
Well, there was not really any other way to go. He's proved himself down south. He's 29 straight wins. He wasn't getting any younger. So to be fair, I think that was definitely the right decision. And I think now, even as we sit, I think the first pup of his is won tonight at Wembley. We're at Wembley this evening. I think the first pup of his is won tonight. A Ravage again pup, and I think he ran ever so well. You probably witnessed that he showed a lot of early pace and was just gone round the corner and very, very game and genuine. I think he'll stand for himself. He's bred ever so well. I think he's bred out of Tico, and his mother, I think, was a sister of the stranger from Indy Rose.
That's good sprinting breeding.
Very, 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 very good. But if he just sends on his temperament, the dog, he's just got to send on his temperament and his pace, and I think he'll throw a hell of a lot of decent greyhounds.
Next we look at a dog who really was the king of the independents. Springwood Mickey ruled on the flapping tracks for years. His record's legendary. You won't find official details of it anywhere, but any flapping man will tell you he was the best. We can see some of his races coming up. Apologies in advance for the quality, but it's worth seeing. He really was a fast animal. Just before Mickey retired, Clive Lawrence of the Greyhound Month visited Eric Jeffrey's Yorkshire Kennels and asked the proud trainer how he acquired the dog.
Well, he originally came from Ireland. I got to know a chap called Jerry Leach, who I think is a steward there, and I asked him, I said, if you see any decent dogs about, you know, just let me know. And he rang one day to say that he'd seen this one trial it, you know, and it hadn't had a race. He'd just seen it trial, and would I be interested? And I said yes, so I bought it, just on that, with no races at all. And when I first got him, he just ordinary. He didn't grade anyway. When I took him to Castleford to grade him, he didn't grade the first week. I remember what he did. He did about, I think it was 1770 or something like that. But then he started improving from there on, you know. And of course, as he got more and more, you get more and more excited as he was running faster. And it's just carried on from there.
And was there a particular time or an age when you suddenly thought this dog is something special?
Not really, no. But he just kept improving, and you win an open race and you think that's it, because I have travelled hundreds of miles and not won an open race, and then he was just winning everything that he went for, and you get excited then, and then I started keeping a check then on what he was doing and where he was winning. And he was breaking track records. I think, I don't know, I think he'll have broke or equalled over 23, I think it is now. Some will be his own, that he keeps breaking over and over again. But so, and he just carried on from there and from there on.
And a somewhat confusing aspect of the independent circuit, the number of derbies that are held. They all seem to have their own derby each track. How many derbies has Mickey won, do you know?
I wouldn't know, but I would think 8 or 10, I would think. Yeah. Oh, they all have a derby. Every independent track has the derby. Generally sponsored by someone, you know. Same as the Whitwood was sponsored by Wafcol, and Ellesmere Port was oil company. They all have a sponsor.
Which would you say is the most prestigious derby?
Oh, Bolton. Bolton, no shadow of a doubt. I would say Bolton is as good as the English derby. And the dogs are as good.
And what's Mickey's record in the Bolton derby?
Well, he won the derby last year, and he injured himself coming out of the box in the semi-final this year. He won his heat in a good time at 30:05, and then he injured himself coming out in the semi-final. That's the one I would have liked to have won twice, more than anything, I would think. You know, because that is the derby.
Now the question I must ask really is the main difference that the general public think about between independent racing and NGRC racing is the fact that you don't have to run your dog in any particular name. Now what are your thoughts about running dogs in different names at different tracks?
Well, I would be all for running them in the proper names at every track. I'm all for it, but it's done. You see, the NGRC dogs couldn't run on the independent tracks in their proper names as they are now, or they'd be warned off. And on a lot of occasions you change the name to try and get a bet on the dog. It isn't often the work because the people in the independent know every dog that's on the track. It's not easy to do.
Do you gamble?
Very little, very little. I do have a bet sometimes. I had a bet at Whitwood at Mickey. I got 2-1 because we put him in as a dog called Alpine for the first heat. But people knew him within 2 or 3 minutes. But it does bring a big crowd to all the independent tracks. Wherever he's running, it brings a crowd.
And would you say Mickey was the best dog you've seen?
I would say, yes, I would say he's the best dog I've seen.
Springwood Mickey is now standing at stud at Pam Heasman's kennels, and who knows, maybe one of his pups learn enough respect to join him on this list of our 6 chosen champions. So there we have it. We've seen 6 of the best greyhounds ever to run in Britain, and I'm delighted that Bob Rowe's joined us to give us his assessment of that sextet. Bob Rowe, of course, Britain's top racing manager. Mick the Miller was certainly before your time, but the rest, apart from Springwood Mickey, you would have seen. Give us the relative merits of, say, middle distance-wise, Mick the Miller against some of the more recent top middle distance dogs we've had.
Well, obviously, Bruce, as you say, it's a very difficult thing to sum up, in as much as Mick the Miller so many years ago, and the times, of course, in recent years have improved dramatically. But nevertheless, Mick the Miller had a marvellous record. He's the one name that is synonymous with the greyhound racing industry. Is a household name even now. And his achievements of winning 2 derbies and, in fact, winning a third, which had to be rerun, puts him right at the top of the all-time greats. It would be difficult to compare really anything with that record. Patricia's Hope, of course, won 2 derbies, which was an achievement in itself, marvellous performance. But I think Mick the Miller will be a famous name as long as greyhound racing exists.
And then we saw some cream six-benders, Westpark Mustard, the star of the 70s, followed by Scurlogue Champ and Ballyregan Bob. I mean, is it easy to compare those kind of dogs?
For me, it's not easy, but I was very, very lucky in as much as I saw all of them run quite a few times. I feel that Westpark Mustard and Ballyregan Bob were very, very similar in class and style. It'd be very difficult to pick between the two. I've got a slight preference for Ballyregan Bob because he seemed to run quite a few more tracks than Westpark Mustard did, and I think the strength of the opposition might have been a little bit greater. But take nothing away from Westpark Mustard, who I believe, and this is from memory, won about 20 races on the trot. Her undoing was when she went for a match race to Shelbourne Park and was beaten by the Irish star at that time, Tommy Astaire. And I think but for going to Ireland and taking on Tommy Astaire over a distance which was short of a best, 600 yards, it could well be that she would have extended her record considerably more than that of 20. Ballyregan Bob, his record speaks for itself. It's a marvellous, marvellous stayer. It was a great spectacle every time he raced, and he was a great crowd pleaser.
You saw him, I believe, when he did his first ever six-bend trial, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, yeah. And you know, right from that time, and even before he tackled six bends for the first time, it was obvious that here was a champion over the long distance in the making, and that potential was realised very quickly.
And what about that old scallywag crowd pleaser, Scurlogue Champ?
Scurlogue Champ, in my view, was very enigmatic. He was a marvellous crowd pleaser, and he did a great deal for the industry. People come from near and far to watch Scurlogue Champ run, and it's a pity that we haven't got a few more Scurlogue Champs at the current time. A magnificent performer on his day, but there were once one or two runs when he didn't show quite as much interest as he might have done, and was a little disappointing. But he won the TV Trophy, of course, and the races that he did win, he was winning by large margins. And as I say, just to sort of reiterate, he was a great crowd pleaser.
Two-bred sprinters rarely make the forefront and the headlines, but Ravage again was a dog that certainly did. And how would you put his 30 run unbeaten record into perspective?
Well, I think that was, again, a marvellous achievement in as much as it was essentially over sprint distances. And we both know that if a greyhound makes the slightest mistake at the off in a sprint race, he's got very little time to put that error right. And so for that reason alone, his performance of winning that many races in succession was a magnificent achievement. It was a little bit unfortunate perhaps that he didn't stay in the north, because there's a good chance if he'd have been taken on the same type of opposition that he did in his earlier races, that he would have eclipsed the record.
That's right. And then on to Springwood Mickey, who was the king of the independents. Of course, such a respected figure as yourself would never go near a flapping track. But do you think that there are top dogs out there among the independents that would challenge the likes of the top 4 Ben dogs on the NGRC circuit? Well,
it's as far as I'm concerned, it's very much rumour. You hear stories from time to time about certain greyhounds that have taken the independent scene by storm. This, of course, was one of them, particularly in recent times. I would imagine that there are dogs that would take on the very best dogs of NGRC racing at certain times, but I think as a generalisation, the answer would be no.
Although I was certainly too young to see Mick the Miller, there's no doubt the records show that Mick the Miller did for greyhound racing in the 30s what Scurlogue Champ and the Ballyregan Bobs of this world have done in the 1980s. So that must be said. As regards Springwood Mickey, well, it's a good few years since I went flapping, so I'll have to leave that to the Bolton boys and some others to tell about that. For me, though, Ballyregan Bob certainly was a charismatic dog if he didn't have the idiosyncrasies of Scurlogue Champ. As I said before, he's a Steve Davis of greyhound racing. You got what you expected from Ballyregan Bob, and you got a 32-win world record sequence.
And what about Westpark Mustard, Alan?
Well, the whole sport was waiting for her or someone to beat Mick the Miller's world record of 19, and she did that in October 74. A great bitch, a very popular bitch. It's questionable whether she would have been able to handle the Ballyregan Bobs and the Scurlogue Champs, but we can never do these sort of matches anymore, can we?
And Ravage again?
Well, that was a sprinter extraordinaire, because sprinters are meant to be lightning machines, and I happened to see him quite often. I saw him really show a clean pair of heels to the Derby favourite Druids, Jono, when my bitch Vic Snowdrop won the big Brent Walker puppy event down at Brighton. What Ravage again did, which most sprinters can't do, was he gave them a start and then beat them. I mean, most greyhounds that sprint round 2 bends are travelling within 3 metres of the traps. He wasn't travelling within 30 metres of the traps. Then he did it all.